If we want to think through if the Vikings should cut Dalvin Cook and draft Bijan Robinson, then we have to talk about running back value and Bijan Robinson. So let's deep dive both of those things on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. This show is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube or even Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app on those smart TVs. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's show is going to be about Bijan Robinson, mostly, and from the Vikings angle, which means should the Vikings draft Bijan Robinson, you're going to have to spend a first-round pick if you're going to do it. But the way that running backs tend to go, pretty reasonable to expect him to be there at 23, or at least close to 23, where you have to do like a meager trade up where you send a fifth to somebody or something. But before we just like plant our flag on that, we kind of have to talk through the actual value of cutting Dalvin Cook and replacing him with Bijan Robinson. We'll put him in the equation as an X for now, and we'll solve that variable later and actually come up with an evaluation. But for now, we have to find out, okay, what does X have to be? And to do that, we have to sort of go over what the value proposition would be. So with Dalvin Cook, you have to cut him or trade him, I guess. But I don't know what the trade market's going to be for, a running back deep into his second contract with chronic shoulder issues. Like, I know he just had surgery, and that theoretically should clean up the whole thing, but obviously it's really hard to sell a team. They're like, oh yeah, that problem that's been plaguing him for 4 years, he's totally past that, and that's why we're getting rid of him. Like, that's a really tough sell in a trade market. So I feel like it's probably closer to a cut. And either way, you're taking on a whole bunch of dead cap. If you cut him, you save a little less than $6 million. If you trade him, you save a little less than $8 million. There's a little bit of guaranteed salary in there that splits those two numbers up. So let's, for the sake of simplicity, say it's a cut, and we're saving a little more than $6 million. You can June 1st it to make it like $9 million, and then you take $3 million next year. That seems like a reasonable-ish idea, just to kind of spread out the pain. But of course, we don't want to be kicking a whole bunch of dead cap into next year. $3 million is not great. So let's just do the standard cut and say that that's the move. And by the way, it's still the same amount of dead cap and cap savings. It's just a matter of if you pay off the debt all at once or in two installments, which either way, by the time 2 years is up, it'll all have been the same. So it saves you some cap dollars. But to get Bijan Robinson, you have to spend a first round pick. Right? Let's say he's there at 23 and you're picking him at 23 again, just to keep things simple. So doesn't that sort of bring up the question, how many cap dollars is it worth to spend a first round pick? If you were to trade a first round draft pick into a bank and get cap credits back, how much would you expect that to be? To me, it's a little more than $6 or $8 or $9 million. I think that would be a really bad use of resources. And that's not a positional value thing. It's just hey, if we're going to cut a veteran to save money and then draft his replacement, a first round pick is way too valuable a thing to be the draft pick that you use in that transaction. Now, the idea of cutting Dalvin Cook and drafting a third rounder, what's the name? Tank Dell. Everybody's really excited about. I haven't watched him, but I guess he's a name. There's a million running backs in the third, fourth round. There kind of always is. Get one of those guys. And now we're talking, right? Now you're spending less of a draft pick. But to me, spending a first round pick so that you can spend a little bit less cash just kind of feels like you gave someone $200 and you got back 10 euros. Like, you don't walk away from that transaction saying, look at all the euros I made, right? You just lost cash. You lost resources. So for that reason, the idea of cutting Dalvin Cook, drafting a first round running back, I don't really love. The only way for me to love that, like I think that's let me rephrase. I think that is a value negative proposition, right? To save, even if you do all the June 1sting and you don't worry about how that affects 2024 and all that, or if you trade, even saving $8 or $9 million, spending a first round pick to save $9 million is a value negative proposition. I don't even think that should be a controversial statement. That's a first round pick is worth way more than $9 million. And that's not even looking at how you compare rookie running back with Dalvin Cook. Because what if you also get worse at that position? Now, a lot of people might not care because they don't think running backs matter or whatever. I am still very sympathetic to that argument, although I've chilled on it a bit. And I'll get to it. But for me, to do that, that needs to represent a significant upgrade at the position. I need to be getting somebody that I think is a lot better than Dalvin Cook. I have a pretty high opinion of Dalvin Cook as a player. And so that's going to be really hard. So when I'm scouting Bijan Robinson, I am looking for transcendence. I am looking for, like, this dude changes the way you play offense. And there's only a select handful of guys in the league that do that. I don't think like Alvin Kamara does that. I don't think Dalvin Cook does that. He did that for a long time, and I don't think and it probably wasn't a good idea, right? I don't think, I think Derrick Henry does that, but he didn't really last year. Saquon Barkley does that. Christian McCaffrey does that. I would struggle to come up with another name outside of those three. So, I mean, we're talking about real good backs. Joe Mixon, Kamara, Cook. We're talking like good backs, guys that go in the first round of all your fantasy drafts that I don't think cross the threshold that I need this rookie to cross. This is a high bar proposition, like a real high bar. And that sort of tracks, I think, with the running backs don't matter thing. So for the uninitiated, allow me to interrupt your state of blissful ignorance. Fast forward if you want to skip this conversation because we've had it a million times. Although it's been almost a year, I think, since we've had the running backs value conversation on this show. So we're due. There's new people and we can have it. So the argument goes from the analytics world, essentially that running backs are samey, that their statistical profiles are all very volatile. They're not stable. And therefore, once you average them all out, it's kind of everybody's a little the same. And the more logical explanation for that is that if you are a high schooler and you're the most dynamic athlete in the world, they're putting you at running back because the high school game is a lot different than the pro or the college game, and passing the ball isn't nearly as efficient in high school. It's really a lot of wing T run game offenses, and so the running back kind of is the superstar versus the quarterback in the high school world. So if you're the stud of studs, all the best athletes that the country produces kind of go into the running back position. And that makes running back this really hyper saturated position with a lot of athletes. Therefore, it's a supply and demand thing. The supply is so high that the price should go down. And if you pay a whole bunch of money for something that you pay a bunch of draft pick a guy in the first round and you could have gotten somebody just as good in the sixth round, well, that's a value negative thing, right? That's the argument as it goes for running backs. And then it's sort of a big series of counters to that, like say, well, what about establishing it for play action? Well, it doesn't really correlate the way you think. And what about, wearing the team down and all that? Well, we can't really find statistical evidence of that. And that's sort of where it has fallen for the last 10-ish years. And that's why you've seen running back contracts kind of decline. The franchise tag for running backs is $10.9 million. That's insanely low for a franchise tag. The quarterback franchise tag is $45 million. It's crazy low. And that's sort of why that's happened, because I think teams have ultimately gotten on that same train where, okay, we kind of understand it's not really worth paying one guy a ton of money, even if you're a focal point running back. We're not going to pay you when we could get the same production out of a committee of 3 undrafted free agents, and a seventh rounder. There's a lot of Ty Chandlers out there getting just as much production as Jonathan Taylors are, or, like Ramondre Stevenson's, right? Like random 4th round pick guys, Kene Nwangwu's. You don't necessarily have to go get your Ezekiel Elliott's anymore. So that's how the argument goes in a nutshell. Now, I do think that that's a little reductive, right? And I also think, and the regret for me is that I spent so long essentially writing off the running back position because of that narrative that I didn't ever really take the time to learn what running backs do, how to evaluate a running back, and how to sort of distill the running back position into the things they do that do matter. Whether or not those things are captured by traditional stats is another thing entirely, but being able to like look at a running back and decide what I want that running back to look like for my team is something I haven't really done enough. So let's do that with Bijan Robinson. Let's right this wrong. And I'll tell you what I think about Bijan Robinson and why I'm not quite sold on him for this really, really, really high bar that I've set. But first, speaking of bars, what about Built Bar? Boy, I promise I didn't do that on purpose. Built.com is where you can go to get Built Bars. They are the best tasting protein bar on the planet. They come in utterly degenerate flavors. I mean, generally, it'll make your skin boil. Science has gone too far. They just, they're coming out soon with a limited edition maple donut one. But get out of here. This is sinful. Churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. Where do they get off making bars like that covered in 100% chocolate that are only 130 calories? Who do they think they are? 4 grams of sugar in that, 17 grams of protein. Get out of town. And also, you could go to Walmart or Sam's Club, pick them up right now, assuming, you have access to roads, which is, I guess, not a guarantee depending on the weather. But if you have access to roads, go to Walmart or Sam's Club. You can get a box right off the shelf. Or you can, of course, still go to Built.com and get some Built Bar delivered directly to your door. Once again, that is Built.com. Moving on with this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Real quick housekeeping note. A couple housekeeping notes, actually. For one, this show will not happen on Monday or Tuesday coming up. I'll be out of town. So this will be the last one till next Wednesday. I'll see y'all then. But while I got you, Dalvin Tomlinson is not voiding right now, after all. His deadline was pushed a month, March 15th now, which is after the league year opens. So that's pretty, I think, right? I think that's after tampering. Yeah, that's the actual first day of the league year. So you have a whole tampering period and stuff. So essentially he becomes a free agent at the normal time everybody else does. And outside of the dead cap hit that he carries, if he does become a free agent, everything else works normally. He gets a comp pick. He can go negotiate with other teams during tampering and all that stuff, I think. So that's nice. I thought he was going to be a free agent, and I don't think the Vikings would do that move if they did not intend to bring him back. That would be kind of pointless if they were just going to let him walk anyways. So that makes me think that they are trying to work out a deal. We'll see if they're successful in doing so. But that's an update on that situation. I thought that was over. That's old news too. That was reported on like Wednesday, but I never got around to it. Anyways, let's talk about Bijan Robinson. So the thing with him that stood out the most to me are his feet. Now, again, I am looking for like eliteness. I'm looking for God tier stuff. I'm looking for a guy that's going to come into the league and immediately be a top 5 running back. I don't want a guy that's going to come in and be the 20th best dude. We already have a guy that can easily cross that threshold, and we're spending more to get to Bijan Robinson. This is a more expensive proposition. This is not a cost saving. This is a cost exacerbating move. So the threshold is high, right? And I think there's 2 places in which he really does, or 3 places I think I would give him, that he does cross that threshold of being genuinely special. The first one is footwork, and namely jump cuts. His feet are insanely active, and also they are very efficient. They aren't wasteful. If you want to really learn about running back and you want to see what's going on in a running back's mind, watch his feet. His feet will tell you exactly what he's thinking, what he's trying to do, what he's trying to set up. And with Bijan Robinson, his feet do a great job of manipulating defenders, of finding his way to the gap, of especially, though, the jump cuts. The jump cuts, I mean, they're not quite Adrian Peterson jump cuts, but they're like close enough to that to make your eyes pop out of your skull. Really fast and very flexible. And it makes it so that he can change his direction very suddenly. That, paired with the second thing, which is his balance, make for a very lethal pair. He's all kinds of guys bouncing off of his hips and his knees and his ankles, guys that come in making perfect form tackles and just slide off of him like he's greased up. there's a very particular athleticism to that, where there's one rep that I think it's against Baylor that really stands out to me for this, where he has to jump cut past a defensive tackle that has penetrated, like just killed the center on a swim move, I think, and penetrated. So he's got a jump cut around him, and he does it so hard that he actually loses his balance a little bit, and he sticks one foot out and like uses it as a plant foot to push off and just like forces his balance back in. And the athleticism that takes, it like doesn't look very special, but it really is. Like there is like you're fighting gravity in a way that's so awkward, and being able to do that, there's a very specific strength that takes that's really, really, really impressive. And then the third thing that he does that I think is legit special is pass pro. And I might be higher on his pass pro than like anybody, because I've seen people even say it as a weakness. I think those people are insane. He knows who to block, and he understands the protections really intricately. Running backs in protection, a lot of times you give them fairly easy reads and stuff because they're thinking about other stuff. They're thinking a lot of times about chipping, or do I have to release, or play action stuff, or are they thinking about an actual run play if it's an RPO? So putting a running back in the protection, it's not often, especially at the lower levels, it's not often possible to give them complicated protection assignments. But with Robinson, it is. And I think generally the mental side of his game is really advanced, but it really shows up in protection. It's that there's one rep that really gets me. I think it's also from the Baylor game, where he actually picks up and passes off a stunt with a guard. Like he looks like a center doing it. It's incredible. But there's also a lot of reps where he's just chipping a guy on the way out and he puts his whole body into it. And there's a willingness to that I know coaches are going to salivate over. Again, he's not going to blow up, Alabama defensive ends because you're a running back. You're not going to do that. But you can see him put everything he has into it. And that's what you want to see. You want to see him stop that guy's momentum as much as possible. Your goal is not to pancake him. Your goal is to knock him off of his leverage so that the tackle can pancake him. And he does his job and then some. Those are, I think, the three things that stand out to me the most. He's also a pretty good receiver. He can adjust to the ball, high point it, do all that stuff that you really need running backs to do. And he's built like a running back, so you're not going to have him go run a fade or anything like that. But hey, put him out on a wheel route, and you're gonna he's good at that. Like that's a positive thing that should be part of your offense that rules. So here's where he loses me, because all of that stuff is great, but I need him to be more than that in a lot of places. And I think the one place that really kills me is with those jump cuts. He kind of has to jump cut. And that bugs me that if his aiming point is a little off because the tackle didn't quite get as much space as he was supposed to get, then instead of sort of smoothly adjusting the route, like watch some Dalvin Cook, like go to my Twitter and search from Luke Braun NFL, Dalvin Cook, and click on videos, and you can see some highlights and random stuff that I've posted just to get some all 22, or just look at the film if you have it. And watch his feet, and watch when he just has a little bit of an adjustment to make. When he's just trying to go, he aimed himself at the left hip of the guard, and he actually wants to go on the right hip of the guard. And he'll do that sometimes as like a manipulation move. And watch how smooth it is, how he doesn't lose any momentum. It doesn't take him any extra time. He's just sort of going a little bit off the path and then veering a little bit back on it. And it's very smooth and curved. And with Bijan Robinson, it's very clunky, and he can't make those small adjustments without cutting a foot into the ground and planting and kind of pushing off of it, and it loses speed and it sabotages his burst. So on tape, he doesn't look that bursty. And I have a feeling he's going to test really well in all of the athleticism thresholds, and he's going to, get an RAS over 9 or whatever. But that doesn't matter because he's not setting himself up to accelerate through the hole, because he's slowing himself down just to kind of adjust his path. And that sort of clunky lack of burst is because our bar is on the moon here, is enough for me to say, okay, I don't want him in the first round. So that's like the main one. I've got like three other things that I want to mention about him that are important, I think, to understanding his game, and then we'll wrap everything up. But first, let me talk to you about your new favorite phone game. It's Ultimate Football GM. Look, if you disagree with me on stuff, that's all right. If you don't think that the Vikings should extend Daniil Hunter or TJ Hawkinson, if you think that they should draft somebody I don't think they should draft, then why don't you head on over to Ultimate Pro Football GM. You can go to ultimate-gm.com or just search it out on the App Store, and my listeners get a free 100% boost to their team. It's a full-on football team management simulator. You have to hire the right coaches, you have to draft players, sign free agents, deal with their contracts, the whole 9 yards. It's exactly the simulation that you want. Once again, that is at ultimate-gm.com, or you can just search that out on the App Store to get that 100% free boost. You can just use the promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game store. That's locked on in all caps. So make sure you go check it out today. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. So continuing on with Bijan Robinson, the next thing that I really want to emphasize as a weakness, the first weakness is that he's not bursting through gaps. And I think it's a problem with the way he wants to use his feet, really betraying him. And I'm concerned that if you try to work that out of him via coaching, you ruin part of what makes him special. And so that's a bit of a coaching project that I think is difficult to navigate. And I'd be really worried about that if he were, my team's first round pick. The second thing that really bugs me is indecision. I kind of talked to earlier about, like, he knows what he's looking at. He knows how to think in the zone world. He knows pass protection. He's a smart player, which is why it's so like, you can see that he knows what he's looking at, and it's so frustrating that he won't commit to a decision. And again, combined with that herky jerky jump cutty type of footwork, it means every time you're going to go to a gap, okay, but then I'm not going to go to the gap, but actually maybe I will go to the gap. Every single time you flip flop, you're planting your foot in the ground, you're losing all your momentum, and he's really invited TFLs that way. It's really difficult for me to call, because I feel like that's a scorching hot take. Like, everybody else who's watched Bijan Robinson is just like enamored with him and says, like, good decision making. But maybe I'm just bad at this, and if I am, then I apologize. And you have to be ready to volunteer that, right? It's the draft. Nobody's right. But it feels like he's late on decisions. Like, he knows the decision to make, and he takes like 2 or 3 steps before he's ready to commit to it. And that might be a confidence thing. I'm getting way into the weeds of speculation here. I have no idea what causes this, or if it's even the problem I think it is. But I think that it's like a confidence thing. You can really see it on outside zone plays. So outside zone, I would assume the way that they run it's pretty universal. But you're supposed to go, your first aiming point is the C gap outside play side. So the play side C gap, you want to go outside the tackle, bounce that thing and get around the edge and get a big long run down the sideline. For that to happen, the tackle has to get a successful reach block. And so the tackle has to seal him off to the outside. So the thing is, the tackle will very rarely get that. It's kind of the ideal thing, but the tackles are all coached. Hey, if you don't have an easy reach block, just get up into the guy's face, push him out, and the running back will take the gap behind you. Watch Christian Darrisaw. He probably gets that reach block 10% of the time. It's fine. Like, that works, right? But Bijan Robinson is really reticent to come off of that read, even when the tackle is not even trying to get outside. If the tackle's pushing that dude and you're supposed to get the B gap, Robinson will run past it, and then he'll plant a foot in the ground and he'll jump cut and he'll get back into the B gap and he'll do something crazy and make a guy miss, and the talent is so intoxicating that you go, okay, maybe I'm all right with this. But I think in an NFL world where every little tiny margin and every little tiny fraction of a second matters that much more, that sort of hesitant, delayed decision-making is lethal. That'll get you killed. And again, I don't want to go too hard at him because I think he's an NFL starting running back from day one. absolutely bell cow, go be your starter, probably lands in the top 20 or the top 15. But I just have to constantly remind the listener, our bar is on the moon and it's higher than that. And he's in between that world where he's saying, all right, you're a top 20 guy. You're a positive influence running back, but you're not on the moon with Saquon Barkley and guys like that. I guess Jonathan Taylor, but I have not watched any Colts, so I can't really speak to him or what happened to him this year, or if it was injury or whatever. And then the last thing, and this is tough because I don't think he has it at all, and I just think it's an athleticism issue. That's just the tools God gave him. He doesn't have a great top end getaway speed. There are a couple plays where he'll rip off what's supposed to be a home run. The gap is there. He found it. He made the safety miss. He's off to the foot races, and a guy catches him in like 35 yards. It's really rough. Not having that top end speed, that home run kind of thing. Again, like analytically, it's not the most important thing in the world. And that's not what, like, an analytics department's not going to care about that for their running back. And I'm going to guess the like flying 20 for running backs is probably downweighted pretty hard in most like NFL analytic departments. The flying 20 is the last 20 yards of the 40-yard dash. So you can call, okay, you're up to your top end speed. What is it? That kind of part. And I'm going to guess that his flying 20 will be pretty bad, but I think it's so bad that it actually is a negative because, again, our bar's on the moon. And if we are going to have a running back whose whole point is that he can jump cut around, he can make a lot of guys miss, he can get more out of everything. There's an efficiency to that. There's going to be a yards after contact with him. That's really, really attractive. But if I can perfectly block a run play and you can make two guys miss and you can be off to the races, currently in the building, we have a guy that scores a touchdown there. We have two guys that score a touchdown there, if you want to count Wongo too. Maybe Chandler. I don't know about Madison. That speed thing hasn't been there. And plus, he's not under contract anyways by March. I don't think Bijan Robinson can do that. And I think he represents a genuine downgrade in terms of the top-end explosiveness. But again, analytically, the difference between a 40-yard run and a 60-yard run is not that great. But I think the difference between a 40-yard explosive and cashing that thing and actually scoring on it, and now you don't have to do any goal line stuff, is significant enough. So for those reasons, I'm out on this Bijan Robinson thing. I do think that if all prices were the same, I would probably rather have Dalvin Cook. I would not, like, a way to test that in your brain is don't think about would you bring in Bijan Robinson if he didn't cost a draft pick, but you had to pay him Dalvin Cook's contract? Would you want him? And my answer to that is probably not. I'd rather just pay it to Dalvin Cook. And again, I remind you, a first round pick number 23, is worth more than the money you would save by cutting Dalvin Cook. It's just, you're getting more expensive at the position by spending a first round pick on it. And you're not getting better, I don't think. Maybe you are. It's like arguable, depending on how healthy Dalvin Cook is and how his speed is and how his athleticism is as he kind of approaches 30. Obviously, with running backs, that becomes like a bigger question and stuff. So that's a bit of a loose take. There's a blurry line there, and I think we're somewhere in there. And if you disagree with me, I wouldn't try to change your mind. But he's not transcendent. This is not, I'm looking for generational. #generational. This isn't generational. I'm looking for the kind of guy that breaks an offense, that, the defense comes in and says, we're preparing for that guy today. He's the scariest guy on the team. You can hear defensive coordinators talk about Christian McCaffrey that way. I don't think they'll talk about Bijan Robinson that way in the NFL. He's going to be a positive player. He'll be good. They'll talk about how to tackle him, and that's something, but he's not the focal point of the offense that he joins. At least I don't think he should be. And that's not shade. I mean, I'm calling this dude a second round pick. Like, so was Jonathan Taylor, right? Like, this is not shade at all. So was Miles Sanders. He just played in the Super Bowl. A starting NFL running back that can be a positive asset for your offense at most positions as a first rounder, but I wouldn't take him in the first round. And I definitely don't want the Vikings to cut Dalvin Cook, spend a first rounder on this guy, spin their wheels and spend more assets. Doesn't feel like the right move to me. Hey, I'll see y'all Wednesday. All right. No Monday show, no Tuesday show. Maybe I'll do a Tuesday show. We'll see. I'm flying in late on Tuesday. So, or on Monday. So if I have a time to do a show, I'll do that. But I'll see you all at least Wednesday, and we'll keep going with all this stuff. We'll catch you up on whatever news I miss while I am out of town. Please enjoy your time. Stay safe if you're like snowed in. Love you all. See y'all next time. And as always, Skull.